It is Christmas Eve, 2018. I'm here with Grandpa Wright, and I'm going to ask him some questions about his life. Get to know him a little better, especially pre-Long Beach days. All right. So, what is your full name, and why did your parents pick that name for you?
Okay. My full name is James Lamont Wright. The middle name was the name of my father's mother. The Wright, as we've talked about before, is I guess you'd call it an assumed name. My father was in some criminal difficulties in the 1930s. As a result, he went to prison. When he got out of prison, he changed his name to Wright from Toby, T-O-B-E-Y. And he used the name Wright until after he left my mother. And then he changed his name back to Toby and later to Lamont. But that's where the name came from. I don't know where he got the name James. I do have an uncle named Loy, James Winfrey, and it may be that they adopted my first name from him.
Did you have a nickname?
Jimmy.
Jimmy.
Or in the service they called me Charlie Brown or Jimbo Goof.
So when and where were you born?
Seminole, Oklahoma, 24 September 1937, about 3:37 in the morning, in Harbor Hospital.
Harbor Hospital. Do you know if that hospital still stands, or?
It doesn't.
Mm-hmm. No. How did your family come to live there?
My grandparents had a fairly large farm near Pea Ridge, Missouri. As the children began to grow up, the family began to migrate from there. My grandfather was a farmer. He had farms in 7 or 8 different places while my mother and her sisters and brothers grew up. One of my mother's older sisters, whose name is Rita, married a man named Giles Dawson, and they started a flower shop in Seminole, Oklahoma. And they asked my mom to come and work for them and design flowers. So she was working for them as a single lady designing flowers when she met my father, and subsequently I was born.
What is your earliest childhood memory?
Probably about 4 years old, on my grandparents' farm in Missouri. I was out playing in the yard and I saw a little brown bear, and it was running at me, and it was bigger than I was. So I ran like crazy and got in the house. 2 other memories from about that same time. I had a stick and I hit one of the horses on the rump with it, and he kicked me, knocked me down. And I jumped out of the second story of a barn into a pile of hay and landed on a bee, and it stung me in the bottom. So those are my earliest memories.
What was your favorite thing to do for fun?
Oh golly. Well, as I more growing up and started thinking about that kind of thing, my best friend and I would ride our bikes everywhere. We'd ride for 10, 15 miles on bike rides all over the Long Beach area, and sometimes we'd jump on what they call they used to call them the red cars. It's the equivalent of the transit rail line now, go up to Los Angeles. But just hanging out and playing around and riding bikes and seeing new things.
What was school like for you as a child?
I had fun. I skipped the third grade. Never learned to read or never learned to write properly, which is still a problem. But I enjoyed school and I had fun doing it. Got involved in drama from time to time and had fun doing that. Worked on the stage crew in high school. Was in military ROTC in high school and had a lot of enjoyable times doing that. So, yeah.
Do you remember any fads from your youth?
Well, I had a flat top haircut. Levi's, white t-shirts was the standard wearing apparel.
Mm-hmm.
Tennis shoes.
What about music? What was your favorite music from your childhood, teen years?
Well, I really didn't think a lot about music, I don't think, until high school and college. And then I got involved in jazz, modern jazz. I really love modern jazz. I liked trumpet music, I remember. And even classical trumpet music I enjoyed. So, I can't even remember the names of all of them. Lorenzo Almeida, I remember, was one. I loved Andres Segovia, Marsalis. The names are getting away from me now, but the Modern Jazz Quartet was my favorite musical group. I love their style.
Who were your friends when you were growing up?
Oh, golly, a lot of them. We had a very tight neighborhood in, both places where we lived while I was growing up. So Larry Smith he was in LDS, and he's the one that got me going to the LDS church, even though my mom was a Baptist. Directly across the street was Nancy Sharp, who was my girlfriend. And then there was Beverly Priest and, what was his name, Jay Bass. He became very, very wealthy. His dad was an investor and did extremely well. I had a lot of friends.
What world events had the most impact on you while you were growing up?
Well, World War II was going on from the time 1939 to about 1944, 1945. And Long Beach was a Navy community, and it was also a big industrial community in terms of preparing ships and airplanes for wartime. And so most of my family was involved one way or the other in the military defense effort and manufacturing and things like that.
Did you ever do anything to help, or were you too young?
Well, I was, in 1944, I was 7 years old. Later, when I was in high school, we were afraid of Korea and what was going on in Asia. And so we had what was called a Ground Observer Corps. And I would get up on top of Long Beach City Hall with a pair of binoculars, and I would report every airplane that I saw in the sky. And it was a way of monitoring to make sure that, where no unplanned aircraft were in the area. So I did that.
Wow. Who was the oldest relative you remember as a child?
My grandparents, the ones whose picture is directly behind you. It's grandmother and grandfather Winfrey.
What do you remember about them?
Well, he was a farmer. She was a reader. They taught me to read. I was reading probably at 6th grade level when I was 4 years old, and they were the ones who taught me to read out of the Bible. She was an extraordinary cook. I remember she'd make biscuits the size of my fist, and country gravy, and we raised hogs, and so we had bacon all the time, and we had chicken, so we had eggs all the time, and yeah, it was a good life. She's a great cook.
Are there any physical characteristics that run in your family?
I can't think of anything specific. I suppose there are some, look-alike kind of things, but I haven't paid a lot of attention to them.
Were there any special heirlooms or other memorabilia that have been passed down in your family?
Not to us. During the Revolutionary War, there was a General Cornwallis, who was an English general, who passed through the South, and my family was, at that time, was rather well-to-do, and they provided entertainment to General Cornwallis, and he ate out of a silver creamer and sugar and tea set, and that stayed in the family, but I don't know what happened to it. It never got to us.
When and how did you meet your wife?
I was living in Gardena, California, with 3 roommates, and on Friday nights we'd go to a dance called Friday Night in Long Beach at a church, at LDS Church, and a friend of mine had started the dances. He started them specifically to find a wife for himself. And on a particular night in March of 1971, I walked in to the cultural hall, and I was on the northwest corner of the cultural hall, and I looked at the southeast corner, completely across this floor. There were people dancing, and Janet was standing there alone, and I looked at her and I hit my roommate and I said, I'm going to marry her. And he said, nah, she's too young. So the first chance I had, I danced with her and found out she wasn't too young, and kept going. Funny though, we dated 3 months, and she wrote in her diary, Jim Welch took me out again last night.
When did you get married?
June 28th, 1963, Los Angeles Temple.
What memory stands out the most from your wedding day?
Well, the wedding, of course, and the temple. I guess he was one of the counselors in the temple presidency who married us, but he said essentially never could have been mad at each other. And I remember that. But the big deal was that Janet's parents had never been married in the temple. And when they found out we were going to get married, their bishop went to him and said, look, if you'll clean up your act for the next 6 months, I'll give you a temple recommend so you and your wife can get married before Janet and Jim get married. And so we were sealed in the temple the same day as Janet's parents were.
Wow.
And we were sealed to them. So that was the most memorable thing.
I bet. Why did you choose your children's names?
Well, as I told you, I'm the only Wright in the world as far as, my bloodline. I'm the first. And I can't say I had a fully happy childhood because there was a lot of strife and discontent in the family, my stepfather and mother. And I was just determined that I was not going to have that. And I thought, well, the way to start it is to start with a good name, and I was proud of my name, so when Jimmy was born, we named him James Donald Wright Jr. In fact, we joked and said, at that time he didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl before, the synthesis or whatever they call it. And everybody said, "Oh, what if it's a girl?" I said, "James L. Wright Jr." And we were teasing, of course, but anyway, that's how he got his name. Your dad got his name because we like the name Wayne. There's no family tie to it. His grandfather, Janet's father, is Earl K. Wright, so we give him Earl's middle name. So that's how he got it. Lori, again, we like the name. Suzanne was Janet's mother's name, so we gave her Suzanne after the middle name of her mother. Connie Lynn, that was strictly made up. Nobody in the family that really ties to that. There's a joke that my secretary's name was Connie, and so I named her after my secretary, but I'm not sure that that's true. Mark Allen. There's not really a tie to anything with his name, but we liked it. Jonathan was going to be a Benjamin, and he was the only one that I was in the delivery room when they were born. They kind of, as the life went on, they changed the habits, and so I was able to be in the delivery room. And we knew it was going to be a boy, and we had decided firmly that Benjamin, because that was my grandfather's name, the one behind you. And as soon as he was born, we said, "No, that's wrong," and we changed it to Jonathan.
Wow.
So that's how he got his.
Interesting. What was your proudest moment as a father?
There are so many. I think I've got to say that when each one were married in the temple. I mean, that's just, all the other things are almost supplementary to that. But that was certainly a matter of great joy.
It's a big deal. What was your profession and how did you choose it?
When I was dating Janet, I was working at an aircraft company as a printer. I hated it. I had been an insurance salesman. I hated that. I really had no idea. I had a certificate in retail merchandising before I went into the Air Force. And I thought about that, but the wages for retail merchants were just horribly low, and I just decided, no, that's not for me. So, I was just kind of going from job to job, really. And Janet said, "I'm going to an education week, you want to go with me?" Sure, why not? So I went to the education week, and one of the classes was what they called an employment outlook counselor. And I sat through the class, and I don't remember anything she said, except that she said, "If any of you are interested, I can give you a test that may help you to figure out what might work for you in life." And as far as I remember, I'm the only one that stayed and took the test. But I had 2 years at Long Beach City College at the time, and it was just, I think I wasted my time, honestly. But I took the test, and she said, "You might consider law or law enforcement." Now, nobody in my family had ever been in law enforcement. Nobody had ever been in law. I was the first one to get any college at all. And so, education was not the great big top priority for me. Although in the Air Force, I became determined I was going to get a better education. But law never even entered into it. My roommate at the time was a deputy sheriff. So I went home, after that day, and I said, "Oh, here's what the lady told me." He said, "Oh, I know some jobs." So he got me a job application, and I filled it out, and I got hired as a deputy marshal. And they put me in uniform, and the first day I'm, in my uniform, they said, "Go in that courtroom and just keep things quiet." That's all they told me. I'd never been inside of a courtroom in my life. But I walked in the door, and as soon as I opened the door and saw the courtroom, I knew that's where I was going to spend the rest of my life. And got in law school, and one thing led to another.
What law school did you go to?
I went to two. I started out at Southwest University Law School in Los Angeles, and then Mom and I bought a house in Long Beach, and it was just too much of a commute, so I dropped out of there, started over at the Pacific Coast University Law School in Long Beach, and finished there.
What was the most memorable experience you had on the job?
Well, really I had, while I was working toward becoming a lawyer, I was a deputy marshal for 3 years, and I was a court clerk for 7 years. And then I was a lawyer for 15 years and a judge for 17 years. So, that's sort of the whole line of my law career. As a deputy marshal, I was directly involved in the Watts riots. We were working 24 hours a day, trying to get the people off the street, get them in jail, and get them in custody, and protect the city. So that was very memorable. I can't say I have any great recollections as a court clerk, except Marlon Brando's wife was in one of the courtrooms where I worked. I saw very early civil rights demonstrations and the consequences of those, and actually made some pretty good friends out of that. As a lawyer, I represented the family that claimed to have been named in a will by Howard Hughes, giving him every billions of dollars, and I got national headlines on that.
Wow.
I think that was the only national headlines I got as a lawyer. I got in several fights with the Long Beach City Council over the way they treated local neighborhoods. That was interesting. As a judge, I had one case that made worldwide news when NBC News tried to set up a sting operation against police officers.
Mm.
And it was about a 6-week trial of 2 officers being charged with having lied in their police report.
Wow.
And ultimately the case was dismissed, so they didn't stand any consequences. But that's the most notoriety I got. And then just before I left the bench, I got picked up by national news because I was punishing people who were supposed to come to jury duty and didn't come for jury duty. And I was finding them a bunch of money and even threatening them with jail for not showing up for jury duty. I got national headlines on that, so.
Interesting. Tell me about your time in the military.
Okay, spent 4 years in the military. Started out in Texas, in San Antonio. From Texas, they sent me to Yale University to study Chinese. I was pleased with that, but also disappointed, because when I went in, they promised me that I could become an air cadet, a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really wanted to do. But then when they offered me a Yale University, I just, my mind clicked and said, you want this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Yale for a period of time. Then they sent me to California to learn code breaking. And so I studied code breaking there, and after that they sent me to Germany. I spent 2.5 years doing code breaking. Told the kids I was a spy.
Mm-hmm. So what years were that?
1956 to 1960. Yeah. And it was really in the Air Force that I decided that I was going to get a good education and learn something more about the world, because I was pretty provincial when I went into the Air Force. And just seeing some of the beauty of the things in the world changed my whole worldview, what I wanted to see and be.
What was the most memorable thing from being in Germany?
Let's see. Golly, that's hard to say. I guess this is silly, but this was actually published in a best-selling book. my roommate and I went to Brussels, Belgium, because the Brussels World Fair was going on. And so we went to the World's Fair, and my roommate was fluent in Russian, and I knew, a little bit of Chinese and a little bit of German. But two things happened. One was that we went to the U.S. Pavilion, and it was stocked and manned by girls from the prestige colleges on the East Coast, Radcliffe, Smith, that quality college. And my roommate went up to them, and they had the Declaration of Independence in Russian. He said, "May I have a copy?" They said, "No, this is only for people who speak Russian." So he started reciting the Declaration to them in Russian, and one of the girls just went, "Here." She was very upset. That was funny. But the other thing that happened is we were walking along, and there was a water, kind of one of these cascading water things between people going one way and going the other. And I looked across, and I saw this girl. She was 14. She was in a girls' school. They were all wearing the same thing. And I looked at her, and she looked at me. And for about the next 2 hours, I stalked her.
Oh.
And we were having fun doing it. She was laughing and giggling. I never did get to talk to her. But I thought, that's the prettiest girl I've seen in Europe the whole time I'm here.
Wow.
And so I called it my half-day love affair. But I wrote that up for there's a guy up in Washington that wrote books. One called Everything I Knew I Ever Learned in Kindergarten. And the one that he did that I was in was called Love Stories. And so I wrote that for him, and he published it in Love Story, and it was a bestseller.
Wow.
So.
That's awesome. Of all the things you learned from your parents, which do you feel was the most valuable?
I think it must be from my mother, and that is that being kind to others can help you in your entire life outlook. She had a rough life. My father was a narcotics addict and a liar and a cheat and a thief and everything else. My stepfather was a good breadwinner, but he was an alcoholic, and he was a mean alcoholic. And she had to, survive and take care of the kids through that and get us through it. But the thing I'll remember is every time anyone, friend or family, was in need of help, she was the first one there. And she bailed people out more times, out of real jams, more times than I can ever remember. And I think that was the thing that impressed me the most, that, you can have your own problems, but you can also have a much better life if you feel like you're doing good for others. So that's probably the thing I came away with that was the most helpful.
What is the one thing you most want people to remember about you?
I guess I was a good father.
That's actually what my dad answered when I asked him that question. So what about the world is different from what it was like when you were a child that it is today?
Well, as I told you, when I was in Arkansas, Missouri with my grandparents, they had a radio that was powered by a battery, and we listened to it half an hour a week because that's, the batteries wear out. In order to make the radio work, because we were way out in the country, my grandfather had gotten a massive roll of copper wire. He hooked it to the back of the radio, ran it out the door of the kitchen, across to the barn, and almost a quarter of a mile
Wow.
long, and that was our antenna, so we could hear something on the radio. We had a two-hole outhouse. We had a special room where our well was. It was called the well house. And we also kept ice in there for usually up till about June. You know, they'd just chop it up and chunk it up and put it in there so that we could have ice on special occasions. It was a full working farm. I remember my grandmother's breakfasts and her dinners, you know, when we had workers come in to help us to harvest the crops and so forth. So no electricity, coal oil lamps. She cooked on a wood stove. We took baths in a tub about this big, this long and about this deep. Heated the water on top of the stove. You ever hear about lye soap?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we used lye soap to clean with. I remember sometimes in the summer, we'd go down to the nearest creek, which is a very pretty little creek, and we'd take our baths in the creek. The water is crystal clear, and that was fun. Cars have changed, obviously, so dramatically, and you wouldn't even recognize them anymore. Airplanes had piston engines, no jets. Trains really haven't changed much, I don't think. Took a few train trips. We had, instead of a refrigerator, we had what's called an ice box, where they'd every once a week, the iceman would deliver ice, big chunk of ice about this big. You'd put it in the top of this box, and that would keep everything cold. And that was until about probably 1948, 1949. Obviously communications have changed so dramatically. I remember our first TV was a black and white TV, and we were so excited about that. My favorite TV show was called Space Patrol, and when I was in the 8th grade, we actually took a trip up to Hollywood and met all the performers in Space Patrol and
Wow.
got their autographs. But if you look at, I think I found one Space Patrol episode on Facebook, and the technology is so outdated, it's ridiculous, but it was fun at the time. I guess those are major things.
What would you say is the most dramatic change that you've witnessed in your lifetime? Either like technologically or like computers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was joking with somebody last Sunday. I imagine if I were to ask you how you would picture the Liahona, it would include a lot of the technology that you're familiar with today. You know, the compass. I've got a compass on this thing. Communicating immediately, you know, from God. Click, somebody calls me. It's just, you know, it's an astounding piece of technology. But when I grew up, the idea of just a compass that would guide them was revelatory. You know, and the idea of a communication through that compass of any kind was revelatory, not, you know, just beyond comprehension. So that's one example. Yeah, I think, you know, the computer revolution is the biggest thing.
And you've seen it from start to finish, or?
We got, in 1978, we got a Radio Shack Model 2. It had 4 kilobytes of memory. 4 kilobytes.
Kilobytes.
You programmed it in what's called basic language. I don't know if you know what that is or not. But it's a basic programming language. And if you wanted to have a computer, you had to learn BASIC. And if you made one mistake, you had to start over. Essentially, you had to start over. And you didn't have CDs, you didn't have hard drives, you didn't have anything. You had a tape recorder, just a plain old tape recorder. And you recorded everything that you did in BASIC onto that. And that was your programming. And then you could also save on the tape recorder.
Wow.
And so, we built our own games. Anything that we did with it, we created.
Wow.
Well, Jim was in the 8th grade at the time, and he immediately stole a computer from me. And, it became his lifetime.
Yeah.
But that was 1978.
Incredible.
I had one fun time. It was still fairly early in the computer revolution. And one of the members of the first presidency of the church came down for our general conference, or our state conference. And I was a bishop at the time. And we were walking back from between meetings, and I was with the state president and President Faust. And I told him that I'd just gotten a new computer and I was using it for church. He said, "How are you using it?" And I said, "Well, I've got 2 programs. I've got one that has the names of everybody in the ward and the jobs that they've done in the church. And then I've got another list of all the jobs in the church and what's required of them. And so, when I have a job that's open, I match the jobs that are open with the people in the ward." And, it helps me. And the stake president was a Dutchman, and he said, "But Bishop Wright, what about inspiration?" I said, "Oh, no problem. I hope you can aspire on the top of the chapel." President Faust laughed about that. So,
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to say?
I'm just very happy with my family. Yeah. I think I've been very greatly blessed.
Well, thank you for sitting with me and answering these questions, and
Thank you for doing this.
I think it'll be treasured.
I hope so. Thank you.